Hello, Simone. This episode is definitely going to go in the best of category for Basecamp because it is a theory that I came to which completely transforms how I see the history of humanity. And it is probably the single most offensive theory that we will air on this channel. If it becomes a mainstream theory, it will almost certainly always appear. Any video that shows it will have a little explanation at the bottom by like the UN or something about how this theory isn't accurate. Historically, I had this view that I think most people have, is that human civilization basically emerged in a few different regions, and that you would have these periods of growth where sometimes one region would be ahead, other times another region would be ahead.
Totally. Yeah. Like, oh, China's the most cutting edge right now. And now it's Japan and now it's Egypt and whatever. Yes, totally agree.
Yes. This theory posits that that view of history is mostly downstream of what I can only call the DEIification of the historical narrative. And that the vast majority of feats of civilization were created by one civilization.
Oh no. And I'm
Yes.
worried.
Awkward. And it came to me when I was studying ancient Rome and ancient Greece recently, because I've been on a kick watching a number of videos on ancient Rome and Greece. And one thing really hit me as I was studying these periods. Whenever Rome would retreat from a region and the Roman Empire would fall temporarily in a region, that region would fall back into a period of people essentially fighting over who had the nicest mud hut. Like, very little was happening in those regions during that period. And this includes the region that my ancestors were. Only when we were under Roman colonization during the period of the Roman Empire did we really do anything meaningful, civilizationally speaking.
Okay,
And I
so
began to,
to be fair, you're not arguing that it's your own ancestors who were somehow superior from a cultural
yes, not my
standpoint.
own ancestors. My ancestors were mud hut people. For example, I am pretty much British, Irish, Scottish, English, the British Islands. You might say, well, come on, your ancestors must have produced something. Aren't there any great ruins in ancient British Isles? I was like, well, there's Unga Bunga like Stonehenge. I wouldn't call that a great ruin. And they go, come on, there must be some great architecture in the British Isles. And I would say, actually, there is. In the 70s AD, there was this beautiful bath complex built in Bath. But they're like, you see, the British can do something. I go, well, unfortunately, the Romans built that. And it was in a nowhere backwater of the Roman Empire. And Britain didn't build anything comparable for literally thousands of years. This was their equivalent of like a district, like sub-district that nobody cared about. But now you might be going through your head, what led me to this thought? So I was studying the Roman Empire, thinking of all these ruins, and then I started thinking, okay, but what about like the other civilizations of Earth during this period, right? Like, I've traveled all over the world. I've been to something, I think it's over 100 countries, like done a lot of travel. And so I started thinking, okay, what were the other major civilizations?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, you have Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica had great ruins, right?
Yes.
You've got your Machu Picchu, for example.
Well,
But
and ancient Mayan and Aztec ruins are extremely impressive.
right. But as anyone broadly knows, those ruins are fairly recent. Like Machu Picchu was built in the 15th century. And so, but I gave them I'm like, okay, that doesn't really count. They got their civilization started later. But there's also like India and China and Japan, right? Like they're all ancient civilizations. And I've been to these countries before. And I was like, okay, so when I was in Japan, I must have seen some ruins that had any sort of equivalency to even like Roman backwaters in like Spain and stuff. And I started thinking about it. And I was like, what? Okay, China. I've seen some hint that there was a civilization there. And then I was like, no. No. I have seen an East Asian ruin impressive at the Roman ruins. There was Angkor Wat, and in India, there was Hampi. And then I look up the dates of those ruins, the 15th and the 14th century. So those ruins were built. Angkor Wat was built when King's College Chapel was being built in Cambridge in 1446. Like, they were built incredibly recently. And so then I was like, okay. But
Egypt.
I consider Egypt to be the ancestor of Greek civilization. So it's one line of civilization. The Greeks considered Egypt to be the ancestor of their civilization.
Did they really?
In Greek literature, they would say, oh, we got our civilization from Egypt. Yeah, they're always borrowing from Egypt. So basically, the single line of civilization that I can track goes Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Greece really takes over the flame from Egypt, and then Rome takes over the flame from Greece, and then Charlemagne takes over the flame from Rome, and then Charlemagne's kingdom splits into the various distinct sort of warring kingdoms that take over the flame from that, and then the flame is taken over by the British Empire, and then it's sort of seeded around the world. But to get back to the story here, I was like, okay, but works of literature, right? I have heard about all of these great works of literature by totally disconnected cultures. Like, for example, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms or the Journey to the West. Did you know when these were written? Romance of the Three Kingdoms was written in the 14th century. Journey to the West was written in the 16th century. I was like, okay, well, what about like a Water Martyrdom, also known as Outlaws of the Marsh, or Dream of the Red Chamber, right?
I've never heard of
The 14th
these.
and the 18th century, respectively. To
Okay.
give you an idea of how late these were written, to works of literature that I can consider just like, as somebody who has read translated works of literature, and I'm just like, this one grabs me, these two don't.
Well, how about
Dante's
the
Divine
Tales of-
Comedy was started writing it in 1308, and he finished writing it in 1320. Hundreds of years before any of these works.
How about the Tales of Genji? The Tales of Genji. That's Japan, and that was, I think, even written by a woman.
The 11th century, Simone. So that was written only 200 years before Dante's Divine Comedy. Did you read the Tales of Genji? Have you read the Aeneid?
Yeah, and okay, that's a lot better. It's
okay. So when was the Aeneid written?
Yeah, okay, admittedly, way before the Tale of Genji, like by more.
The Aeneid was written in 29 or 19 BC. The Tales of Genji were written literally 1,000 years later, and were literally less sophisticated and complex.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's not like it's even close. And this is like when I started having this, I just started going through, I was like, oh God, this can't be real. And again, I'm not saying that there was like no Japanese civilization, that they didn't produce any art, that there was no Chinese civilization, that there was no Indian civilization. But what I'm saying is, and you'll actually see this, is that these civilizations advanced artistically, literarily, at about the speed of my own ancestors, which were the British, until the British met the Romans. And then after the British were fully colonized, the British began, like as civilization spread out from Charlemagne again, they began to do some, more sophisticated things. But what I'm saying is just that civilizationally, along almost every metric, they were dramatically behind the one civilization.
Yeah, so there's basically, what you're arguing is there is one civilizational lineage that has ever actually kicked ass. It started with Egypt, went through Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, etc., and sort of into Europe broadly. And there's just kind of nothing that competes with it. And no one has spontaneously figured it out the way that this has. So everyone who is most competitive now is standing on the shoulders of that one giant. There is only one giant.
There is only one giant. And every time it touches another region, right? Usually first they rebel, it leaves, it descends into savagery again, then they come back, they try to set something up. And by the time they set up any sort of permanent civilizational infrastructure in the region, then that region undergoes a rapid increase in prosperity, in the amount of artistic works they're producing, in the amount of industry they're producing, in the amount of science they're producing. Wow. So it's not that it only works for one people. People didn't invent this.
Insofar as a culture is willing to adopt it and build upon it, they can thrive.
Yes, and they can build their own iterations of it, but that no one has independently captured this civilizational dynamo.
I guess you can kind of look at how Japan just started killing it after World War II when it started embracing elements of Western culture, and how they took many elements of Western culture, did it so much better and in this sort of unique Japanese way. So yeah, like
Yes.
doing jazz on it, like putting your own spin on it and being additive with it can give you a lot of power, but it is definitely pulling from that one derivative
And
thing.
the other big change that has happened in my understanding of world history is
Uh-huh.
my opinion of the Mesoamerican civilizations has gone up dramatically because of the one civilization theory, which is to say that historically, my take on Mesoamerica is Mesoamerica was largely backwards compared to most of the world, but that
Yeah.
was only because they got a late start.
Yeah, it took
When I
people a long
began
time
to
to get down
actually
there.
compare
Yeah.
India, China, and Japan and ignored the one civilization to
Mhm.
what was happening in Mesoamerica, Mesoamerica kind of was schooling them at various parts in its history.
Fair point.
And that was the other thing that really got me when I was thinking of like great ruins I visited and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, to give
Yeah.
you an idea of what I mean here, Simone, I want you to compare two ruins. Now, keep in mind Roman ruins. You've seen Roman ruins. You know, most of the Roman ruins you've seen are either 100 years pre, like they're either like 50 AD or 50 BC. Like the Roman baths, right, were built in 70 AD in the
Yeah, but also
backwater.
just everything in Rome itself is so impressive. I mean, even just the building material that everything is made of, because Rome sort of was torn down to create what now is Rome, is impressive. Just the very building blocks of the city.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm gonna send you some pictures. So when I was looking for ruins in Japan that were from around the period of, say, Tikal, which was from the 4th to the 10th century. So you see Tikal, that's the first picture of Mesoamerican ruins there.
Gorgeous.
So when Tikal was built, that's when Japan was building what is now the Hizmara temple ruins from the 11th to 12th century BC. So first of all, you can see it's pretty trivial compared to what they were doing in Mesoamerica at the same time period.
Yeah.
Um, Not only
I
that, it's
mean,
trivial compared to like anything Rome ever did in their history. It's trivial compared to the baths that were built literally 1,000 years
so
before.
wait, what is special about Hiraizumi
It's one of the
in
only old
Kyoto?
ruins I could find in Japan.
It's like one of the oldest buildings or something?
Yeah. We'll go over some other buildings in Japan that are older than this, but most of them are just going to look like destroyed mud huts or completely reconstructed
I
buildings.
feel like I visited some really old ones in Kamakura, but maybe.
We'll go over them. Like there's a palace complex, but it's fairly small when contrasted with something like Tikal
Yeah, I guess
or
the argument is they're all just very handsome wooden buildings. And your point is that when it comes to monumental architecture or stuff that really shows a level of,
sophistication.
yeah, I mean, like these are exquisitely built buildings, but we're still talking Lincoln logs versus like carving stone and
Yeah,
achieving.
it's Lincoln logs versus like grand, huge projects that require hundreds of thousands of people, cooperation, infrastructure, giant
Yeah.
economies.
And
So
don't get
so
us wrong, because we love Japan. We're
Yeah,
weebs, number one.
we're big sinophiles, okay?
Yes.
Weebs, as you would say in low culture. But I was disappointed, and we'll go over like actual Japanese literature and compare contemporary Japanese literature
Mhm.
to other literature in different parts of the world. But
Not impressive in comparison. I'm
it's
conceding that.
okay. The next temple series you have here
Okay.
is Chichen Itza in Mexico. This was
Yep.
built in the 6th to 13th century. So again, like that's actually really impressive for
Yeah.
Mesoamerica.
Yeah.
That's like Roman level stuff there with like
Yeah.
genuinely unique and sort of shocking art.
Yeah.
Now we're going to
And in
go
a
to the next
hostile
one that we're
environment,
like, okay,
you have
well,
to
what
keep in
about
mind
China?
just
China must have had something in that period. This is the closest major ruin site I could find to like a
okay.
Roman ruin site in China. This was built in the 14th century. It's Guancheng.
What about that underground complex with rivers made of mercury? That seemed really impressive with
We'll get to
Tarsus.
that, but we'll get to that in the art section
Okay.
because I go over that one in the art section and it is not as impressive as you'd think.
Okay.
When contrasted was what Rome was doing. And so I asked AI this because I was like, this cannot be true.
Yeah.
All right. So I was like, okay, Like, where are the Roman-like ruins in Japan, right? Like, and they're like, well, Japan has some ancient ruins. They're generally not as extensive or monumental as those found in Rome, Angkor, or Mesoamerica. However, Japan does have several significant historical sites that offer glimpses into its ancient past. So this is what AI came up with. So we had something called Nara, which was built 710 to 784.
Nara's
So if you want to
beautiful.
look up what
Yeah.
the Nara ruins look
I've
like.
been.
So consider what you're looking at here. Like, consider this compared to any Roman ruin site you have ever been to. And we'll do
Yeah, we're still
do the picture
talking
on Roman
Lincoln
ruin
logs
sites.
versus.
This is 700 years after Rome, and it's Lincoln logs.
Yeah, like versus transporting obelisks. It's just, this is cute. Let's take it and move it.
Okay. Then you're like, okay. So there's got to be other stuff.
Mhm.
Well, this is the 1,300-year-old Buddhist temple, the Ganjing Temple. So the Ganjing Temple, I'm like, okay, that's cool. This is just a building. This is not like a grand complex or anything like that. And it's like, okay. So here's one. I found one that's 14,000 to 300 BCE. It's called the Sina Mayana site. Okay, what about it? What does it look like? Oh, this is mud huts. Okay, this is like similar to what I'm talking about, like Norwegian mud huts. Like it literally, I wouldn't know if this was in my ancestors had built this in the UK before they met the Romans or not, like it is mud hut style. And again, we're not just, people can be like, oh, well, maybe the ground here wasn't good enough for building, right? Like maybe it was too many natural disasters. Maybe they only had trees, right? And I'm like, yeah, then how come nobody else did it? Okay, I can see that explaining Japan alone. Okay, it can't explain Japan, Korea, China, Africa.
No, but that's not even an excuse, because the point I was going to make about Mayans and Aztecs, for example, is that they're dealing in incredibly hostile jungle environments where you are fighting an aggressive environment, and they still managed to build a ton. So I just don't feel like you have that much of a legitimate excuse when it comes to
And same with the Romans. It's not like the Romans did big architecture when the weather was nice.
Well, and they're right by corrosive oceans and waters and stuff. Yeah.
Pretty much every part of their empire had giant works in it, whether it was a backwater like Britain or, the Antioch, or in their African colonies. Like if you go to Tunisia, you can see giant things. Like it wasn't like a sometimes they did it, sometimes they didn't thing. So that excuse doesn't really hold.
No.
So, okay, now we're going to go to China because, of course, China must have done something.
China, yes. And China's all about being like, we're the OG civilization. We did all this first. We invented electricity. We invented aerial combat, etc.
We're going to get to Chinese claims of inventing a bunch of things as well, because they were also less...
That face. That was a cute face.
I don't like this is true. Like, I always try to take the most pluralist understanding. And the only way I can even say this theory is knowing that I come from a mud hut people. Okay? I am only comfortable disseminating this theory or even having these thoughts because my ancestors had nothing to do with Rome or Greece, and they were flinging poo at each other when they were gifted civilization through colonization.
No, yeah, your ancestors were literally the barbarians that Romans couldn't even bother to hang on to because they're like, you know what?
There's really nothing much. So I'm mostly Scottish in ancestry. They literally just like built a wall and were like,
keep them out. This was the first wall. Build a wall.
Build a wall. Yeah. But by the way, literally about 1,000 years before China builds the Great Wall, but we'll get to that in a second.
It was heavily restored in both the 1950s and 1980s. I didn't know that. Not even old bricks. Am I missing something here? So the old stuff's gone, hasn't it, really? But then it doesn't count. It shouldn't be a wonder then. You can't just build something on it and still get all the tourists in when it's not what it says on the tin. What I'm looking at is basically a wimpy home. Got bears in here. What's this all about, though? It's almost like they know that the wall isn't that good. It's like, what else can we give them? We've charged them like £7 to get in to see an old wall. Well, it's not an old wall, it's from the 1980s. I've got a mate who's got some bears. Stick them down at the bottom. This is the original wall, isn't it? Or is it? I don't know. Is it just badly done? This is pretty shit, isn't it? Are you having a laugh? This isn't the Great Wall, is it? You're kidding me. I mean, I like the way there's no tourists and that, but then why would they be?
Okay,
Just
so the
thinking about
signs
Carl
to
Pilkington
ruins,
on the
I would
wall.
send you pictures of it, but
Yeah.
it's from 4,800 years ago, and it's believed to be the remnants of the Shu Kingdom. It's yielded many bronze artifacts. Basically, you just see piles of artifacts, and otherwise, it's a fairly flat area. There's not even anything really to show you. Then I have the Yingzhou ruins. So this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Henan province. Yingzhou was the ancient capital of the Shang Dynasty, 16th to 11th century BC. So this was the capital of their entire civilization.
Oh, sweeties. Oh dear.
Yeah, it's very much oh, sweeties, that is not a civilizational capital.
Crap.
And I
They
feel like,
in
as,
your
and as we
clothes.
go through this, what
Okay.
you're really going to get is it was just so convenient from like an everybody getting along standpoint that we pretended and we kept matching, I think, things that were happening thousands of years later in other parts of the world to things that like the ancient Greeks were doing. And through not like putting dates on them, we were able to in our head have this idea that like different civilizations were developing sort of parallel to each other when
Yeah.
this just wasn't happening.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah,
And
there's just sort of the ancient Japanese and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Chinese and I never thought about comparing time by time, and I've never seen a history class do that, which is quite interesting. So
yeah, well, and it also breaks a lot of the things. People will be like, well, you should look at like, why the West is winning for now. That like shows that this is all due to like geography and like accidents. And it's like, yeah, well, then explain to me why when Rome fell, the West went back to a bunch of mud hut people until somebody reignited the torch of civilization, specifically
Mm,
Charlemagne. Why
mhm.
why is it that every time Rome left a region like Spain was able to produce great art when Rome was there? They were able to produce great buildings, they had a great economy. Rome leaves, they go back to mud hut people. It's not like no, sorry, but it's not like Europe. It's not like it was anything special with Europe. In fact, it didn't even
Mhm.
start in Europe. It really started with Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, like, when you look at Mesopotamian ruins, which we'll get to in a second, like some of
Uh-huh.
the very oldest civilizational ruins or Egyptian ruins, and then you compare it to like capital of China from just like, they're
Yeah.
not even in the same league. And this is now the thousands of years earlier. So now we're
Yeah.
going to go to the Langzuru architectural ruin. And note, this is an AI being exhaustive with me, trying to find all of the best ruins it could to impress me. So this is one only dating back 5,300 years. So, this is like around when like a little bit before Dante's Inferno was being written. And
Uh-huh.
look at it.
Well, based on what you've been saying about findings, it seems that these are people who've been more interested in clothing and accessories and not so much grand
Well,
architecture.
apparently they also weren't interested in art, which we'll get to in just a second. But you can see here that the site is just like a flat site. Like there's nothing there. It's like a few outlines of previous foundations, and that's it.
Yeah, no, this looks like the beginning of a housing development that's weirdly spaced. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's what I'm getting from this. It gives housing development.
Yeah, and people can be like, well, it was all wood, or they used more wood and stuff like that. But again, like these Roman things are there, even things that used wood. And that's the really interesting thing. You can go and look at like one civilizational areas. You can walk around their old buildings and in the very old churches and everything like that. You'll see wood, you'll see blah, blah, blah. Like
Yeah,
you'll
yeah.
see stuff that is
There are wood
supposedly why
elements.
this other stuff isn't there anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah. But
Um,
I think that you should get points as a civilization for demonstrating long-termist thoughts and building to last. So when you look at ancient Mayan and Aztec, well, I guess not that ancient, but when you look at that and you see these stone artifices and you see what people built, even Stonehenge, you got to admire it more because these are people who are like, this has to last for thousands of years. I'm going to build this to last instead
yes.
of short-term thinking.
So the one thing that the Chinese built that was actually, potentially like equivalent in impressiveness is the Emperor Xingzong's mausoleum, which is where the terracotta army is. However, the only thing that really makes it impressive is how many terracotta figurines there were. Nothing else about the site is particularly impressive. When
The
you
rivers of Mercury were not impressive to you?
Note, the rivers of Mercury thing, we don't know if this is real. It's not like archaeologists, when they were excavating this area, found rivers of Mercury. A guy writing 100 years after the tomb was constructed created a mythologized account that there was these giant rivers of Mercury sort of set up in the tomb. But, and we have detected that there is some Mercury in the tomb, but it's not like we found it or anything. So we don't know. It could be a myth, could be a fairly modest thing.
I don't know, like, so let me explain to you what I mean. Like the Terracotta Army, like
Mhm.
logistically speaking, it may be a lot of people, and we're going to go into the artistic merit of it later to compare it
Yeah.
with equivalent Greek statues or
Mhm.
other statues that were made around the same time period.
Right.
That one, it artistically wasn't very sophisticated compared to what was going on in the Mediterranean region at that time period. Again, I'm not Mediterranean. And it also was architecturally not particularly, like it was something. Like it was a lot more than the later Chinese stuff. I'll give it
Yeah,
that.
that like I mean the statues themselves had unique facial features
Yeah,
and
it was from around
personalities.
200 BC as well. So, pretty impressive. But again, and so now we're going to get to the last major architectural ruin site that it was able to find for me
Mm.
in China. And this was the Jihon ruins. And I will send this to you. Oh, that was the ones that we went over, like well,
The housing development.
so these ruins in China, yeah, they were the ones along the Silk Road. We went over them earlier, just not very impressive. Okay, so then people are like, well, what about the Great Wall? Right?
The Great
I think
Wall.
other than the Terracotta Army, that's the one thing in East Asia I may give some credit to, but it was from the 7th century AD.
Well, and also
No, sorry, 7th
compare the
century to 17th century AD. I need to make that clear.
yeah.
But
No, if
continue.
you compare the Great Wall, which is a wall, I've walked the Great Wall. It's a wall. It's not that big.
This is pretty shit, isn't it? You having a laugh?
To the Roman aqueducts. They built
Yes, I'll
walls
put some
that
Roman
moved
aqueducts from
water.
significantly before the Great Wall. We'll be looking at them when we go over the Roman
heated
stuff.
floors. They had heated floors in bathhouses. I mean, like it's just there's no comparison. There's no comparison.
And I'd mind you that the Great Wall was started 700 years after the Roman aqueducts were built. And it wasn't finished until 1700 years after the Roman aqueducts were built. It's just not a comparable thing. Then you have, I was talking with a friend about this, and they're like, no, this can't be true. What about the Sui dynasty's Grand Canal? That was a huge thing. So this was from 581 to 618 AD. The problem is it was big. It was big. It was not one of the things that AI primed me with, and it probably should have been because it's actually fairly impressive in terms of just the sheer size of it. The problem is that the sheer size of it or the complexity of it is pretty not big compared with the Roman road network. Again, 500 years before this. And, what they're doing with the canals is they're digging pits and then they are lining them and putting various buffers on them so that water can flow through them. The problem is that the Roman roads, which were much, much, much more extensive, did the same thing. You needed to dig about 3 to 5 feet down and then put multiple different types of layers of rock and stone down to create these ultra durable roads, which still exist today. So again, civilizationally, we're just talking about a different scale here.
Okay. So, and then people are like, well, what about Africa? You can't forget Africa. Africa did some things. What about Great Zimbabwe? Okay. Let's look at Great Zimbabwe.
I'm not familiar with Great Zimbabwe. Excited for this. Okay. Oh, I like the rounded.
It's
towers.
interesting architecturally, but it's not like particularly impressive. It looks like
it looks like a fortification.
Yeah, it looks like a fortification, really.
But it doesn't.
But not a particularly large fortification. I'd say it's about the size of like a star fort.
Yeah, if that. It looks pretty small.
Yeah, it looks pretty small, and that's called Great Zimbabwe. That's the one thing they got there. It is not particularly impressive. Now, again, people are like, are you saying that there was no great monumental architecture or art produced in Africa?
Oh, this is a medieval city. So this is
Oh, it
very
is?
new.
The city began construction in the 11th century, and it was abandoned in the 15th century. So yeah, she's right, medieval. 1,000 years after Rome was doing its stuff, and it's nothing compared to a Roman thing.
I'm like, no, I'm not saying that at all. I can go to Tunisia and see amazing architecture. The problem is it was built while they were Roman colony. I can go and read great writings from Alexandria. The problem is that that's a descendant of Egypt, and a lot of things were written during Greek or Roman colonization. And people are like, what do you mean Greek or Roman colonization? There's so many great Egyptian figures that aren't from the period of Greek colonization, like Cleopatra, the Ptolemaic Greek princess. Oh yeah.
Greek lady.
That's the other thing about the way that this civilizational system works is it appears to sort of pass the torch on to sort of the next iterator on it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and
Um,
yeah, I mean, you have argued to me many times, and I'm obsessed with ancient Egypt in various periods, right? I go through that great courses lecture and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. But you point out quite fairly that they do stagnate. They kind of just, they get really good at just keeping things the same. And that's why I think your point about passing the torch and the collective iteration upon this one line is meaningful.
I know I'm going to show you the one exception to the one civilization theory, and this is a few things in extra ancient India. Specifically, right now for architecture, and we're also going to go into literature because extra ancient India did compete with the one civilization in literature.
Okay.
It's almost like it almost had a civilizational explosion and then didn't. So this is the Anjati and Ellore caves.
Those look
This is
amazing.
BC 10th century, 2nd to 10th century BC.
Okay.
Really old.
We got a contender here.
Absolutely. It may not compete with most Roman things, but it definitely competes with the Greeks, who they were
Oh,
contemporaries
yeah.
of, if you've been to
Yes.
ancient Athens.
Yeah.
That is impressive.
Mhm.
And we'll keep seeing this. In India, the most impressive monuments are often the oldest, which is a little weird. And we'll go over what might have happened there. It's the same with their literature. If you go to their like BCE literature, and this is sort of going to be a giveaway,
Yeah.
you will find a flourishing of literature that definitely competes with the Greek literature of the time period. But if you then go 500 years, 10,000 years in the future, and you compare it with what's coming out of the one civilization, it's just like Popol Vuh stuff. Sorry, I don't mean to. It's like this animal did this, and this animal did this, and then there was the this, and it's like, oh come on, you guys can do better than this. You guys wrote so many great works 10,000 years ago. Like, what is this?
Yeah, there seems to be absolutely nothing that will prevent a great culture from entering a dark age if the selective pressures necessary to keep the torch bright aren't there.
I will note, though, that the differences between India's great works when contrasted with time-gated great works in Europe in the one civilization, or even time-lagged great works in the one civilization, do not fall as far behind as those of China or Japan. So here I have on screen here 2 temples, each built in 12,000 CE. And while they aren't these sorts of large complexes that were being built in Mesoamerica at the time, or the giant cities and ruined structures of Rome that were built, 1,200 years before this, they are at least interesting and impressive to a degree. Generally speaking, this one civilization theory, new perspective I have, has dramatically risen my view of ancient Indian civilization and ancient Mesopotamian civilization, and dramatically lowered my view of ancient East Asian civilization, particularly China, which just sunk to almost nothing in my opinion. Specifically, because I used to think of them as like an equivalent to what was going on in Rome and stuff like that, and they just like factually weren't. And people would be like, well, what about their economy? What about their economy? Like, wasn't their economy so big? It's like, this is when people act like Massa Musa represented some giant civilization happening in Africa at the time. And yeah, I mean, there was a people and a culture there, but they weren't producing things equivalent to like what the ancient Greeks or Romans were producing. Just having a lot of wealth doesn't translate into cultural production. And I think that this is in a way more damning, that a culture with all this wealth wasn't able to turn it into the types of things like, you know, the aqueducts or the road network or the ruins everywhere you go or the art or the literature.
This is a Mesopotamian ruin site that I'm sending you here.
Okay.
To give you an idea, to just contrast everything that we've been looking at right now, this is the Mohenjo-Daro. This is from 2500 BCE.
No,
You see the pictures here?
what we're looking at, it seems to be some kind of city complex.
A massive city complex.
Yeah.
Why doesn't China have a single one of these? Why doesn't Japan have a single one of these when we have one from an inhospitable region made with mud from 2500 BCE from the one culture?
Well, it's not just mud, it's proper bricks, but yeah.
Yeah, but what I mean is you can't just say we didn't have stones.
Yeah, yes, right. To carve, etc. Yeah.
This is an incredibly impressive site. But okay, let's also look at some other things, just so you can remember for people who might have forgotten what Rome was doing and when were they doing it. The Colosseum of Rome, consider that many of these that we've been looking at were around the 10th century, was made in 72 AD. The Colosseum of Rome. Like nothing that we have looked at to me comes at like 1/10
Even
the
close.
Colosseum.
Well, and most people are accustomed to seeing the Colosseum ruins and not thinking about how it was with mechanical floors, you know, this big underground complex.
But the Colosseum literally had naval battles in the center of it. With, like,
right. Yeah.
triremes and like
we don't presently have even stadiums that do the same level of crazy shit that the Colosseum did. So fair. Okay. And maybe cruise ships are pretty impressive. I know they're seen as so trashy, but I'm just so impressed by cruise ships. They're like these amazing spaceships.
So now what I'm sending you here, this is from AD 212.
Okay.
This is the Baths of Karkala.
Okay. Yeah, we've got towers, we've got complex buildings. This is an archways. Yeah. Unique architectural elements. This is a varied building. Yeah. All right.
So this is an aqueduct from 1 AD in an outer territory in France. Okay. Point de Garde, France.
Oh,
this is
gorgeous.
Dramatically more impressive than like the Great Wall, for example.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's literally hundreds of years earlier, many hundreds of years earlier.
This is the original wall, isn't it? Or is it? I don't know. Is it just badly done? This is pretty shit, isn't it? Are you having a laugh? This isn't the Great Wall, is it? You're kidding me.
So now we're going to look at Paula Arena, and this is in Croatia, 27 BC, but it basically looks like the Colosseum. And okay, we're like, what about distant? Because people kept hearing me talk about Tunisia, right? Like, what was Tunisia like? Okay, this is Tunisia in 238 AD, so like distant colony, right?
Okay.
This is what Rome was putting up in Africa.
Backwater. Whoa! What? It's just another. Whoa. Okay. Sorry, it's a very impressive Colosseum building.
Yeah, it is an impressive Colosseum building.
That is,
and it was 238, which is way before any of the other sites that we're looking at. Now we haven't gotten to the art or literature yet, okay? But so far, because when I first brought this theory up to you, you were like, "That cannot possibly be true."
Yes.
You know, are you beginning to be like, "Oh, this is a bit bigger than I thought it was in terms of the scale of differences"?
I'm kind of already sold. I'm concerned about this now because it's going to make me look really bad at parties if I bring this up. Thank goodness I don't go to parties anymore.
Those were all built later in the one civilization. Let's go to the Athenian temple ruins, okay? So these were built in 432 BC.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's
these are
what I
literally better than a single set of ruins I was able to find anywhere in Japan or China.
Yeah, massive columns still standing after so many years.
No, actually, I think the columns fell down at one point and it was rebuilt.
Oh, okay.
But that was recently that they fell down. I think it was due to like bombing and like the Napoleonic campaigns or something.
It was 1687, and it was an explosion caused by Venetian bombardment that severely damaged the temple, causing many of the columns to fall. So they stayed up till 1687.
I don't know. I'll have to find it. But
I
yeah,
hope not.
they
Wow.
stood for a very, 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 very long time. Same was Egypt. Like
Mhm.
nothing in any of these other places comes close to Egypt. Really,
Yeah.
the only place you get close, again, is super ancient India, and then nothing from up into modern times.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll put on screen here some pictures of like Roman settlements in Turkey and Spain, so you can see this isn't like an isolated thing. It's like literally, I can't find a single thing from these other civilizations, and yet everywhere the Romans go, they're building something.
So if I'm anticipating what listeners are thinking, it's okay, fine. Your point is made about architecture. I'll believe in the one great culture or civilization theory of architecture, maybe literature, which you brought up, but I don't know, like the art, who cares? Like I've been to so many, I don't know, like Asian art museums to refute this. And
Yes, and the reason why that refutation works in your head is because you haven't compared cross time when the Asian art you're looking at was made versus when the Greek art was made. Okay, I'll go straight to art instead of literature. I was going to read a bunch of literature texts, but no, we'll go straight to art. All right. So I just decided to do a random search for Greek art, and this was the first picture that came up. There's lots of beautiful Greek statues, ancient Greek statues.
oh yeah,
This
and
picture
we
came
see
up, and this is 440 BC. Okay.
440 BC. Okay.
440 BC is when
Wow.
you're looking at the statue, right? So
Yeah,
I was like,
it's so realistic. For those who are only listening, we're looking at a classic Greek statue, but is a very highly polished marble of a nude male with, extremely realistic detail. This could just be a human who is painted and is naked, but very small penis for whatever reason. And yeah, that's the only part of it that doesn't seem realistic.
yeah, and I had this moment where I asked Google, I go, okay, give me examples of Japanese art from 440 BC. Well, first I said statues because I wanted to compare like with like.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
said there
yeah.
are no Japanese statues from 440 BC.
Oh.
And I was like, wait, this can't be real. So I managed to find some piece of Japanese art from this time period.
Oh dear. Oh, I don't know what this is, but stylistically, but this could just be that we're biased, We're looking at a very
Simone, no human in history, I guarantee you, if you showed that Greek statue to somebody from most of Japanese history, and you're
Yeah.
like, do you prefer this or
Yeah.
this Japanese art? They'd be that effing
I
statue.
know. Yeah, you show
have
that
to
to like a Japanese person, like, and or I guess if you delivered that Greek statue to someone in that same period of Japan, they would prefer to have the Greek statue for sure. Yes.
So do you want to know what my ancestors were doing during this period?
Yeah, I'm sure nothing that impressive, right?
You're going to get a kill it with fire moment here.
Oh, what? No!
That's literally the best my ancestors were able to do when the Greeks were putting on this like perfect physique of humanity, and then the my ancestors are like,
welcome to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I'm getting that meme where like they begin to play John Williams' Jurassic Park theme, and then it goes to like a recorder playing it terribly.
oh yeah, the recorder playing one.
Oh no, it's terrible. Oh, I need to not look at that. I need to look at the statue again, the palate cleanser, even though it has a micro penis.
Okay. What about the Chinese? What did they have? Well, again, with the Chinese, I ran into one of these problems. I was like, give me statues that the Chinese made around 440 BC. And they were like, Chinese didn't make any statues around 440 BC. And I was like, okay, so what were they making? It goes, well, they were very skilled bronze crafters. So I will show you a bronze bell, and they also carved jade well,
I
and
like
a jade
bells.
pendant from China during this period. And you've
I
got to
like
click on it to open it.
pendants. Okay. Okay. I mean, yeah.
It looks like
Yeah.
it was made by a kindergarten.
Yeah, it's not very impressive. The bell's fairly impressive. I mean, that requires metal forging, that requires technology. And so I
Bronze
admire
is
that.
not a difficult metal to forge, Simone.
I mean,
We're in the Bronze Age here. The okay, anyway, but again, like just nothing really there. And so you can be like, okay, the terracotta army, all right?
yes.
It must compete with that Greek statue we looked at. Well,
No.
see, there's two little problems here. One, the terracotta army is literally 200 years after that. And two, you might not have looked at the terracotta army up
No,
close.
no, it doesn't come close. The terracotta army is impressive in its mass customization and its scale. It is not impressive because the statues themselves are really
You
awesome.
might forget just how unimpressive it is compared to that Greek statue. I just sent it to you so you can compare it.
No, I have a pretty good. Let's see if memory is accurate here. Yeah, that's exactly what I pictured. Well, yeah, but
Okay,
yeah.
now we're gonna get to, and you always find ancient India. That's where you get things that come pretty close. This is India a few hundred years after those Greek statues.
Okay.
It's
Um,
nowhere close, but it is like in the realm of contention.
Yeah. Well, and they're going for fan service here in a way I would argue kind of matches the fan serviceness of the Greek statue. So yeah, we've got polished stone, very, very, very skilled stonework. So yeah, this is good. Yeah. And you could argue, Malcolm, that the lack of, we'll say, photorealistic accuracy is a stylistic choice here. So yeah, I'm gonna give this credit.
Yeah, I'll give it credit, but again, this falls into my thing is something seemed to be happening in India, but it seemed to have died out. And this will be more clear when we talk about literature and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
now people will go like, but China, they had so many great inventions. And so it's like,
Right.
I had remembered this. I was like gunpowder. And then
Yeah.
as I started going back to it, I was like, gunpowder's doing an awful lot of heavy lifting in my brain right here when I'm trying to think of Chinese
When
invention.
I'm thinking flaming lanterns that have explosives. Am I getting this wrong?
Gunpowder again. Gunpowder is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So when you look at the things that China invented that the West did not invent, you do have some impressive things. You have paper making, 2nd century AD.
Awesome.
I will point out, though, that 3000 BCE papyrus was invented.
Okay.
Now, paper is cheaper to make, lasts longer, and easier to like store. So just like strictly better. So you got paper making. Definitely going to give them that.
Yes.
You've got wood block printing. This is in the 6th and 7th century.
And that's good. That's great.
Gunpowder, the 9th century. That's a good one. Okay. Then you got the compass in the 11th and 12th century. That's a good one.
That's awesome. Yes.
Yeah. But here's the problem when I started trying to investigate this.
Silk.
It's not really an invention. That's a byproduct of an insect. But yeah, okay.
No, come on.
Okay, so we'll count silk. So we have paper making, printing, gunpowder, the compass, and silk. And the one civilization, you know what they invented? Literally everything else. That's the problem.
Okay. Whoops. Yeah, that's
Gunpowder's and all of the things you see here are not things that require civilizational infrastructure to invent. They're not actually particularly complex inventions. They're more like discoveries of like chemical phenomenon, right? That's the problem with this, okay? Or a unique process for making something, right? I'm not saying that these regions never had like great individuals who would come up with these interesting ideas. I'm just saying that whatever this civilizational infrastructure that seems to have spread through the one in civilization did is it gave these people the ability to crank out tons more stuff than you would get an equivalent great mind in one of these other civilizations. And so we need to figure out why, but I need to continue to go with proving my point because I'm not done with proving my point yet. But specifically what I mean is like if a Leonardo da Vinci had been born in Japan, for whatever reason, he wouldn't have had the infrastructure to be as voluminous and diverse in the things he was producing. But sorry, I need to go to literature because you got me off the ball when we got to literature. Okay, literature. Well, as you remember, a lot of the literature that we think of as being like the definitive works of China are actually pretty late, like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and the Journey to the West, 14th and 16th century, respectively, well after something like the Divine Comedy. Which was written in the 13th century. You do get some, and think of the reason I'm using the Divine Comedy here is because I think of the Divine Comedy as being a fairly modern work within the tradition of the 1st century. I'm not going back to something like the Aeneid or the Odyssey for great works here.
The Divine Comedy honestly reads like fan fiction to a great extent.
It reads like fan fiction, but the reason I'm using it as my benchmark is in my mind, the Divine Comedy is a modern work.
Yes.
And so when I say that these works are hundreds of years after the Divine Comedy, I'm saying they are very, very modern works.
Well, and there's also like Machiavelli's The Prince, which I think is probably a better piece of literature to refer to because it's more a product of like, it's less derivative.
That was written 1513.
Okay.
So that would have been written at around the same time as, a bit before the Journey to the West and a bit after Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah.
And I would say, as somebody who's read excerpts from all of those and actually spent a significant amount of time studying The Prince, The Prince blows their pants off in terms of its complexity and depth. It still has good advice for people today where you're like, dang, that's a good point. Where I don't, read Journey to the West and I'm like, wow, that's a good point that really changes my perspective and how I interact with
making
people.
it and acting differently after reading it. That's fair.
Yeah, well, because it's just at a level of sophistication that's like not even remotely touched in these other regions.
Yeah.
But okay, come on, let's keep going here. So we got the Book of Songs, which is ancient Chinese poetry. Again, poetry, which is like fine. Like I've read a little bit of it. It's fine. This is the 11th century to 7th century BCE, which is like good, but it's like generic old stuff.
For an example, here is a poem from it called Fishhawk. The fishhawk calls, high above the water it flies. I long for my beloved, who is far away from my side.
It doesn't really, I'm not particularly impressed with it. I compare it to something like the Iliad, right?
Yeah.
And then you got the Records of the Grand Historian. This is the 1st century BCE, a comprehensive history of China written by Sima Qian, which is like cool that they had historians, but like the one civilization doesn't have like the one historian. It's got like hundreds of historians that we rely on, just like the rate it produced historians was also way, way, way higher. And then people can be like, well, what about the art of war? 5th century China.
BCE.
First of all, have you read The Art of War? I've read parts of The Art of War. It's not a very impressive work.
If you haven't read The Art of War, here's an example of some quotes from it that AI thought were particularly poignant. The quality of a decision is like a well-timed swoop of a falcon, which enables it to strike and destroy its victim. Or, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
Secondly, the reason why I'm like, do you happen to know if a similar canon was had in the one civilization? And they're like, I never really looked into that. And I'm like, why haven't you looked into that? And I'm like, well, because I guess it would be totally unimpressive if one did exist. I would sort of expect the ancient Greeks or Romans to have a book on how to do war. And they did. They had, who wrote it was Aeneas Tacticus. That's where the word tactics comes from. In fact, he had a whole series of them. He had such a comprehensive series of these books that only one survives today, and it's on specifically how to survive long sieges, and it goes into detailed stuff like how you build things in the harbors to prevent the boats from entering. So just dramatically more detailed and practical than The Art of War, and it was like a whole encyclopedia on how to do war, and it was considered so unimpressive within the time period when contrasted with the other works.
No, they couldn't be bothered to save it. Wow. Didn't click save.
Yeah,
Read it and didn't bookmark it. Whoops.
didn't bookmark it, but we can tell from the one book that it was basically an entire encyclopedia on the practicalities of how to do war within that time period.
Wow. That is, I mean, yeah. And you're right. It's not at all surprising that something like that would have existed.
This is not to say that he doesn't have the short little pithy quotes similar to The Art of War. So we just go through a few of these that AI thought were relevant. And I think that you'll just see that the quality of them is much higher and they come off as more profound to me. So these are from Tacticus. In war, events of great importance are often the result of trivial causes. A bad peace is even worse than a war. The desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise. It belongs to human nature to hate those who you have injured. That last one I just think is really profound. It is human nature to decide to hate someone that you have injured. And it's something I see so often. And that's like actually even like in a modern time, like a profound quote. That's not like a live, laugh, love sort of a quote, which unfortunately a lot of the Art of War stuff kind of is.
So you got me on the literature too.
Okay, hold on. No. We're going to give every civilization their fair
Oh,
shot.
are you going to dunk
have
on Beowulf
favorable
again?
today.
Because I feel like in every single episode we've done recently, you find some obscure opportunity to dunk on Beowulf.
Oh, Beowulf is going to get dunked on. Beowulf is, I dunk on it because it's my ancestors. It's your ancestors. It was written, so it's like Gilgamesh quality, right? People are like, it has themes. It has narrative through lines.
It has themes. It was slightly coherent.
I'm like, oh my God, just sweetheart, that it is not a product of a civilization. It is a product of people who flung poo at each other. It is not complicated when contrasted with contemporary works produced by the one civilization before they deemed to uplift my people. But let's go to Japan here. So, okay. We got a good one here. We got Manayushi, the collection of 10,000 leaves, compiled around 759. A magnificent anthology of poetry containing around 4,500 poems, mostly Takana and some Choka. And so I was like, oh, this is great. Okay, well, so what sort of poems were they? One of the most well-known is an attribute to Kantemoto no Hitamo, a prominent poet from the 7th to early 8th century.
Nailed it.
The
I'm just
poem
loving the
expresses longing-
pronunciation of these names.
Okay, the poem expresses longing for a loved one and uses imagery of nature to convey emotion. And I want to, while we will be shitting on Japanese art, right now, my favorite artistic production in the world is done by Japan. I predominantly watch anime and read manga. I think that this is not an ethnic thing against the Japanese. I think that they produce some of the best artistic work in the world. And I said that I think that the Koreans produce the best drama in the world out of the drama I've seen. This is not saying that they can't produce this stuff. It's just saying that once they're touched by the one civilization, as my ancestors needed to be, then they became able to produce this stuff. So the poem expresses a longing for a loved one and uses imagery of nature to convey the emotion. It's like, that is a very simplistic thing. And it's from the 7th to 8th century. Okay, so, and then in another one, in this Tanaka, Hitamoto compares his feelings of longing to the rising smoke from Mount Fuji. The imagery of smoke rising endlessly into the sky parallels the depths and persistence of the poet's emotions.
I didn't know Mount Fuji
Okay.
was an active volcano for that long.
Another famous poem from the Manayoshi is Yamba no Ashitiko, which describes the beauty of Mount Fuji covered in snow. This poem uses vivid natural imagery to create a striking visual scene. Now, that is just that. I'm sorry. Like, you can be like, oh, it's really touching. It's like,
No,
yeah, it's
saying
really,
mountain is beautiful is not an impressive
it's
feat.
really touching, but that's 700 years after the Aeneid. That is just not particularly impressive when I look at the complexity of something like the Aeneid. And keep in mind, the Aeneid is not like, this is the thing. When I'm looking for like Japanese work, like it will bring up like these like 5, like these are the great things. In Rome, like you forget about tons of work because they just had so many awesome things. Or the Greek plays that like we don't even have anymore because they were like, oh yeah, that was a great play that was like as good as this other play we still have. But like,
yeah, but like, haven't you heard of season 5? It's so much better.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
God.
So the Tale of Genji, which you went on about, that's from the 11th century. All right. So let's go into the Tale of Genji here. So keep in mind, a thousand years after the Aeneid. One famous example is the Yugao chapter, which describes Genji's romance with a mysterious woman of lower rank. In this chapter, Genji disguises himself as a hunter to visit Yugao in secret. The story creates a dreamlike atmosphere. It portrays their clandestine meeting and budding relationship. That what? That's like something you would see in the Iliad.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also talking about sex and relationships is not interesting. I think what also makes the Iliad really interesting, and the Odyssey as well, is it takes the fact that men and women can be attracted to each other for granted, and then talks about the way that these basal human instincts conflict with civilizational needs.
Yeah,
It talks
it's like
about,
telling a deeper theme and
yeah,
story.
like,
It's
oh,
meta-narrative.
Paris's attraction to Helen ultimately was extremely damaging, and here's what happens when you succumb to those basal needs. And then also you elevate the wife of Odysseus, who, despite having every reason to believe that her husband was dead, used her wiles and used her intelligence to stave off a bunch of suitors who were basically sieging her home.
And just for context here, the
Mm.
stories she's talking about are from 725 to 675 BCE.
Yeah.
The Tale of Genji, to contrast, was written in the early 11th century. Consider how long it took them to not even surpass the one civilization in terms of what they're writing. And if you want an example of like short quotes from the Tale of Genji, they're supposed to be like piffy revelatory things. You can sort of connect them with what we went over from Tacticus or what we went over from Shenzu. Here are some quotes. Real things in the darkness seem no realer than dreams. There are as many sorts of women as there are women. No art or learning is to be pursued half-heartedly, and any art worth learning will certainly reward more or less generously the effort made to study it. The world know it not, but you, autumn, I confess it. Your wind at night fall stabs deep into my heart. Life is full of uncertainties. Perhaps one day some unforeseen circumstance would bring her into this life once more. Just as a reminder for like the types of things that you're getting from Tacticus, who you probably haven't even heard of because these were seen as just like mundane within his period. It belongs to human nature to hate those you have injured. And keep in mind, Tacticus was writing about 1,000 years before the Tale of Genji was written. And I'd like to point out that if you are from one of these cultural groups and you feel deeply offended that I'm saying all of these things, keep in mind I am saying them from the perspective of my own culture did nothing until it was touched by the one true culture. My ancestors produced nothing. They produced less than even what your ancestors produced. I have the humility to admit this. And I think accepting the one civilization theory, it's a lot about just having the humility to admit that cultures that you might have personally identified with in some way, whether it was because you lived there for a while, or whether it was because you married someone from that culture, or whether it's because they represent your own ancestors, that they may not actually be that as impressive as you thought they were, and that maybe we can all admit that we are children of one culture, and it's not a culture that I have any ownership of myself.
So I think that's really interesting. And also the fact that another through line through, especially in the Iliad, this obsession with lineage, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. There is, again, this focus on long-termism, of this interest of anyone in their role in an unbroken chain of history, rather than their feelings in the moment, which, looking at a mountain and thinking it's pretty is all about your feelings in the moment, or like being caught up in a relationship or romance. This is about short-term hindbrain thinking. And you see that, like, when you look at literature of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, or the stories and plays, it is all about the battle between the prefrontal cortex and the hindbrain, which I see to be the height of humanity.
I agree. So let's go to another one. So another piece of famous Japanese literature, the Pillow Book. This was written around
Sounds so
10,000
Japanese. The
AD.
Pillow Book. So Dakimakura, early
A
appearance.
collection of observation essays by Sai Shigon. So this is from 1,000 years.
At least they had a thing for pillows for long.
Yeah, we may be about 1,000 years after Rome. Okay, we may be about 1,000 years after things like the Aeneid, but surely this was an incredibly sophisticated book. Let's go over some of, like, I asked for one of the most famous ones in it, right? So it
Oh,
gave me
no.
an example. Or I might have just looked at it and then just chosen the first example I found. But anyway, this is what it: a white coat worn over a violet waistcoat, duck eggs, shaved ice, mixed linoleum soup, and put in a silver bowl, a rosary rock crystal, wisteria blossoms, plum blossoms covered with snow, a pretty child eating strawberries. That's it. That's one of their great pieces of literature from that period. That
Wait,
was
were those
AI trying to impress me with the very
was that
best.
an excerpt or was it trying to summarize interesting visual
No, it was an
elements?
excerpt. That's the way it's written. It's just interesting things that somebody saw.
Isn't that interesting though how that shows up in anime where like anime just throws in like random moments of like cherry like blossoms falling or like a bowl and beautiful
I'm
light?
not going to say that they didn't capture things. It just
No,
doesn't to
I
me.
find it really interesting that like this still exists as this like element of the Japanese people where they like can't
Again,
stop obsessing
I'm
about the
not
beauty
saying
of
that it doesn't
small
have
moments.
artistic merit. What I'm
No, it
saying is
doesn't. I'm just no. And I'm not arguing that it's lacking either. I'm also not arguing that it's sophisticated. I just think it's really interesting that they haven't shaken this like ability to appreciate in some kind of profound way the beauty of mundane
yes, but
situations.
it's not sophisticated, complex, or multi-layered.
No, and again, it's not about this. It's not long-termist. It's not about the interplay between the prefrontal cortex and the hindbrain. It is a sort of different aesthetic thing, but it's not. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at famous Japanese work from around the Divine Comedy. So I can use that as a benchmark of like broadly modern stuff, but before they were really interacted with by the West.
Okay.
So here you have something called Tezerjiga, and there's a famous line in it. So this is an example of like what we're dealing with in terms of intellectualism. In everything, no matter what it may be, uniformity is undesirable. Leaving something incomplete makes it interesting and gives one feeling that there is room for growth. I'm like, okay, like middle schooler notebook thoughts. And again, like it's competent, but you would have expected something like this from the Greeks like 1,000 years earlier. You would have, and not only
I'm
that,
even
if
early
a Greek had
invasion.
written
Hold
something
on.
like this, I feel like he would have been made fun of by
Hey,
other
buddy.
Greeks. So if you're talking about art, like anything written in my people's area, all you really have is King Alfred's reign, where they did some history, and this was in 871 to 99. So like basically nothing, like one history, and everybody seems to have a history down here or there. And then you've got like effing Beowulf, 975 to 1025. So Beowulf, and again, is at a quality of literature level, like sophistication level, equivalent to Gilgamesh, which was written 2100 BC to 1200 BC.
Yeah,
Like
not
you
not great.
cannot say that these two civilizations were anything alike. And then if
So
you compare
technically,
Beowulf
dumped on
with
Beowulf.
contemporary, like even like the Aeneid, it's childlike in comparison. My ancestors were ungy bunging until the one civilization touched them.
Yeah,
So here is
yeah.
where you get the really interesting side here, which is India. Okay. Now I've read some of these, so I'm familiar with their quality. I'd say
Okay.
that I'd put them in between in terms of sophistication, Gilgamesh and the Odyssey. They're not quite at the Odyssey level. Like their stories don't have as strong of narrative through lines or as strong of theming, and they're frankly not as entertaining to read, but they are definitely slightly more sophisticated than something like Gilgamesh. So this is
Okay.
when you're going to ancient India. Specifically, you have the Vedas,
Yes.
1500 to 500 BCE. So civilizationally, I think above where like Gilgamesh was during that time period.
If you would like an example of text from each that could help you, because I think some people could be like, well, that's like a judgment, right? Like that's not like an objective fact that this is sort of in between Gilgamesh and the Iliad. And I'm like, well, you think that maybe because you haven't read it in a while or you are mythologizing what you have read. So here's an example of text from the Vedas. Uma appeared to the gods and said, "It is Brahman who has won this victory, and in this victory of Brahman, you have become elated." Indra approached her and asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I am Uma, the daughter of Himavan. Know that it was Brahman who gave you victory in the battles you have won. It is through the power of Brahman that you have become great." It was from her that Indra learned that the being they had encountered was indeed Brahman. Then Indra approached Anji and Vairu and said, "You two seem to have known this being closely. Can you tell me more about it?" They replied, "What is there to know? We too are puzzled." Indra then said to them, "Let us all go to Brahman to gain knowledge." Now, this is just a random, I just asked, find a section from the Vedas to an AI where people are interacting with each other. So here's I asked the AI that gave me that one. I said, find a similar section from the Iliad. Achilles, you coward, you greedy heart, how can Archean soldier obey you gladly, either to go on a mission or to fight in battle with all his strengths? I didn't come here to fight because of a quarrel with Trojans. They've never done me any harm, but you, mighty, shameless man, we followed you to please you, to win honor from the Trojans for you, you dog face, and for Menelaus. You don't look at that, you don't think about it, and now you threaten to seize my prize in person, something I worked hard for, a gift from Achaean sons, Agamemnon. By all means flee, if that's your heart's desire. I'm not begging you to stay on my account. I have others here who will respect me, especially all-wise Zeus. Of all God-fostering kings, you're the man I hate the most. You always love to fight and war, so what if you're strong? That's just a gift from God.
You have the Upanishads. This is 800 to 200 BC.
Upanishad.
You had
Upanishad?
Ramaya, which is 500 to 100 BC. You have Mahabharata. This is 400 BC to 400 CE. And then you've got the Bhagavad Gita. This is 200 BC to 200 CE. The problem is...
We're going to pronunciation hall. I think it's
I'm going to pronunciation hell. I can't do this. The problem is you just don't get much after that. Like this is all this BC stuff, like similar to when the Greeks were doing all this. And then it just disappears. And you go further and you're getting stuff.
So I want to make note here that I'm not saying that in India they stopped producing works of literature during this period. What I'm saying is the works of literature stopped advancing in their complexity significantly. And a multi-layeredness, narrative, ability to convey characters. So as an example here, if you're looking, as much as I like the Iliad is still fairly primitive if you compare it to something like the Aeneid, which is just orders of magnitude more sophisticated and interesting and an easier, fun read. Now, if we go to India and you look at something like, we can go to the Swapanashavadana in a Dream by Basan. This is the 2nd to 4th century AD, and I read a quote from that. Uyadan, what will you do? Vasavada, I shall be King Varita's chamberman with a skill in hairdressing. Uyad, and what will Drapaya do? Vasavada, I'll call myself Sarahidi. And again, this is just randomly chosen by an AI, so this isn't me like trying to pick something that's like boring or simplistic. Okay, let's keep going. Let's look at the Slipadakira, the story of Anklet, written in the 5th and 6th century AD. So again, I asked AI for a quote from this one. Who are you, noble ones? Where are you headed on this difficult path? Kayaniki. I am Kayaniki, and this is my husband, Kovalan. We're traveling to Madurai to start anew. Kovalan, respected ascetic, we seek your blessing for our journey. Kavadi, the path ahead is treacherous, filled with wild beasts and bandits. Are you prepared for such hardships? Kayaniki, we have each other, and our love will give us strength. Please guide us, wise one. Kavandi, very well, I shall accompany you to the outskirts of Madara, but remember, virtue is your true protector in this world. So I asked the same AI, right after asking it to generate these, to pick a line from the Aeneid. So keep in mind that the Aeneid would have been, 500 years before that last one I read, and 200 years before the one before that. Dido, distraught at Aeneas' imminent departure, confronts him. Dido, were you hoping to slip away in secret, cruel one? Did you think you could leave this land, and me without a word? Does our love mean nothing to you, nor the pledge we made? Do you not see my tears? Aeneas, torn between his feelings for Dido and his divine mission, responds, My queen, I will never deny what you deserve, nor will I ever regret the time we shared. I did not mean to leave in secret, but the gods command me to go to Italy. This is not my choice, but my duty. Dido, unconvinced and heartbroken, replies, Neither goddess was your mother, nor Darius, the founder of your line, you traitor. No, you were born of the harsh Caucasian rocks and nursed by hurricane tigers. So again, there's no comparison. And it's very interesting to me, the level of sophistication of literature was higher in very early India, but didn't advance at the same rate that it was within the one culture.
Like it's really shocking that you don't get this same development from here. And then if we're comparing like just time periods here, Homer's Iliad, 8th century BC, Homer Odyssey, 8th century BC. If you're looking at tragedies here, so keep in mind, it's not just like the Iliad that we're going to here. You got Opiates Rex, 429 BC. You got Ephed's Media, 531 BCE. You got Ashkeley's Australia trilogy, 458 BCE. And when I'm talking about like Greek tragedy, again, I don't feel like the Indian stuff really compares. If you're being honest with yourself and you've read both, it just doesn't have the same narrative through lines or multi-layered stories. And then, okay, let's go to philosophy. You got Plato's Republic, 380 BCE, and Aristotle's Poetics, 335 BCE. Now, I want you to compare something like Aristotle's work or something like that with, just to get an idea of like the civilizational distance here in terms of complexity, with something like The Art of War.
So these would have been approximate contemporaries. If we go for The Art of War, you would have all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder, and crush him. Good advice, but also fairly obvious. Now, let's go to Aristotle, and this is on Essex. Virtue, then, is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean, i.e. the mean relative to us, this being determined by a rational principle, and by the principle by which man of practical wisdom would determine it. Now, it is mean between two vices, that which depends on excess and that which depends on defect, and again, it is a mean because the vices respectively fall short or exceed what is right in both passions and actions, while virtue both finds and chooses that which is immediate. Now again, you can't be like, oh, this is because one's a translation and one's not a translation, because they're both translations and both from cultures very different from my own. But just the level of sophistication between the two cultures is quite distant.
So contrast something like Plato's Republic with Shinzu's Art of War, if you're familiar with both of them.
Plato's Republic and Art of War are also contemporaries. If you're wondering how they can be contemporaries, yet, it's because we don't know exactly when the Art of War was written. It was written between a period, and that period covers both when Aristotle was writing and when Plato was writing. Anyway, so another quote from the Art of War. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. He who can modify his tactics in relation to his opponent and thereby succeed in winning may be called a heaven-born captain. And then here is Plato's Republic. Just consider the depth of thought difference between these two. And this is a fairly famous one from Plato's Republic, which is, I guess, why the AI chose it. Not me picking and choosing. Imagine human beings living in an underground den, which has a mouth open towards the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning around their heads. Above and behind them, a fire is blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised way, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way like a screen, which marionette players have in front of them, over which they showed the puppets. And do you see, I said, men passing along the wall carrying all sorts of vessels, and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall? Some of them are talking, others are silent. You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners. Like ourselves, I replied, and they see only their own shadows, or the shadows of one another, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they were never allowed to move their heads? And of the objects which are being carried in a like manner, they would only see the shadows. Yes, he said. And if they were able to converse with another, would they not suppose that they were naming what was actually before them? Very true.
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, Sun Tzu's Art of War is genuinely like at a philosophical, like vague, fairly obvious advice. And Plato's Republic is like, how do we build the perfect civilization? Well, we could do X, but that might not work. So what if we did Y crazy thing? And what if we do Z crazy thing? Like, it's just not at the same level. And then you're like, well, it must have stopped as well. No, go to like ancient Roman literature. As we go to 19 BCE, it was Virgil Aeneid's. You go to Horace's Odes, 23 BCE to 13 BCE. You go to Ovid's Metamorphoses, that's 8 CE. You go to Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, 170 to 180 CE. And again, like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, compare that to like Art of War. Compare that to a lot of this stuff that we're seeing come out of Japan like 800 years later. It just isn't comparable. Now I want to show you again that this is a specifically this one chain of civilization thing.
Okay.
This has, and I want to be clear here, absolutely nothing to do with Europe, European people, or European genetics. It is a specific mimetic cluster, and that is made very clear by this chart. So this chart shows notable philosophers and scholars in Europe from the 7th century BC to the 14th century AD.
Whoa.
And you will note Rome fell in the 5th century and
Yeah.
Charlemagne rose in the 9th century. And between those two periods, they are basically mud hut people producing nothing.
Wow. Wow.
And I think this also shows just the height of ancient Greek civilization in terms of the sophistication of that civilization. This is just what I say here. So what do you need for this, right? And we talked for a lot about this, and we came up with some ideas. Now, I think something that tries to look at this from the climate was different doesn't really work.
Yes,
Because
you do not like the guns, germs, and steel answer to this question.
Yeah, because it doesn't explain why everything goes back to mud huts when Rome goes away. It does not explain that well. Why is it that Britain can become a like civilized area when Rome is there, but when Rome goes away, they go back to hitting each other with clubs? Why? They go back to murdering children and then burying them under bridges as like witch spells and stuff like that. Why? This is and I also, the reason why people are drawn in by these environmental explanations is they remove the need to ask hard questions. Okay. And I don't think that you can get a genetic answer to this, like, because clearly it worked wherever Rome was. It worked when Rome was in Africa. It worked when the civilization spread to the Mesopotamian river valley. It worked in my Unga Bunga caveman ancestors in Britain, right? Like, it worked everywhere it was applied. That's the thing about this. It's not like environmental thing. So what we came to is that you need an environment where lazy rich people want to do science and explore the nature of reality. If you look at, it's not, so you need two things, right? You need enough civilizational infrastructure. Like, you need a meme culture that can create enough civilizational infrastructure where you have trade and you have people who are like,
well, essentially
relaxed.
you need enough affluence to create some opportunity for leisure.
But then in that leisure time, you have to want to explore the true nature of reality and the way things actually functionally work.
And we came to the conclusion that to get to that place, you need to have a certain element of varied pluralism, because if you don't have that, there will be an absence of competitive forces that enable those who are somehow more correct about reality to win. So why we think this didn't happen, for example, in imperial China or feudal Japan, is because there was too much uniformity, meaning that there wasn't like competing and being really, really different and more correct about reality wasn't how you were going to win. You would win through brute force by getting enough resources, by
I like the way that you explained, when you were explaining it to me, I thought you had a slightly more eloquent way of putting it, which is you need a pluralistic yet unified people, proud of their differences, but they see themselves as one unit against some external existential threat that they see as wholly different from them. So examples, and it appears that the one civilization does best whenever it's in those environments. So for example, it did really well in the Greek city-states, where the Greek city-states all saw each other as like radically different. But the outsiders, they were something wholly other, right? But they were also totally separate from each other and competing. Or it did
Mhm.
really well during the period of European city states competing with each other.
Yes.
After the age of Charlemagne, it did really well. It did really, but all those groups, they would fight each other. But when a crusade would happen, it's like, okay, everyone come together. Let's go. It did really well in the Islamic Empire. But the
Mhm.
Islamic Empire was also like that. It was very fractious in the way that its different parts functioned. It
Mhm.
did very well in the Roman Empire. But again, anyone who's actually studied Roman history, the Roman Empire was always dividing and then recombining and dividing and recombining
With a lot of factions.
with a lot of factions that had a degree of ideological diversity where you would argue against someone else.
I will note that the one civilization appears to be dramatically less intellectually and more broadly, I guess I'd say civilizationally productive in terms of its advancement whenever it is being housed within a more homogenous empire. So yes, Rome was fractious, but it was hardly as ideal a situation as the ancient Greek city-states or the later competing European countries. And I think that that is why in Rome you had a slowdown of the advancement, which you can see very clearly on this graph. Yes, there was still advancement. Yes, there was still civilization, but it was much slower than under the Greek city-state period or in the later multi-country, plural European system. And I think that this is also why in the last, I'd say 50 years or so, we have seen human advancement in terms of artistic production and stuff like that really grind to a halt because of the urban monoculture, removing the differences between the groups that had been seeded with the one culture. So Rome can almost be thought of as this weird moment in history where the one culture solidified into a mostly uniform unit, which gave it the power it needed to spread out and touch lots of parts of Earth and get them ready and seated. However, it didn't advance within that culture itself. That culture was more of a vector for its spread.
And I think that you can actually see why this leads to better philosophical outcomes. And I'll note here, right? So people are like, well, Japanese people, they were interested in like exploring the nature of reality was like a consequentialist, like this will work mindset when they got rich. I'm like, no, they weren't. Like if you study like actual Japanese or Chinese history, what the wealthy people with leisure time did is they measured the quality of their work by its aesthetic value over
Mhm.
its practical value or
Mhm.
realistic. So they would sit around and write stories that were meant to be beautiful, but they weren't meant to be functional or convey particularly deeper or more sophisticated meanings often.
Well, yeah, and an argument that I was also positing when we were talking about this earlier is there seems to be some kind of a benefit that you get from having a complex political system that is complex enough where there's either a very strong nobility and some form of parliament or some form of representative democracy. Because in those systems, actually being correct and actually being right gives you an edge or a benefit.
Mhm.
So that I think has a halo effect where then you get people who are also interested in science and physics and a whole bunch of other things as sort of an emergent property of people who are right from a more like political strategic perspective have an edge and therefore get to rule that society.
And you get a lot of pushback as well. So you get the like you need the gentleman scientist basically. I mean,
Yeah.
in the Victorian period, it's called the gentleman scientist. In the medieval period, it was called like the maybe monk or something. Or in the the period of the Greek city states, it was your random thinker, right? So like, and we're going to talk about like how Greeks figured some early stuff. Like I think that they're the people who really collated this culture for the first thing. I think its predecessors existed in the Egypt, right? And then it went to Mesopotamia where it continued to grow slightly, but I still think it was very nascent and it was supercharged when the Greeks got it. Like
Yeah.
they exploded it. They were the reactor that made it something. And I think that you can see for the exploration of the Greeks' exploration of the nature of reality, sort of how it builds on itself and why this would lead to such civilizational advancement so quickly. So you'll have something like Thales of Miletus proposing that water was the fundamental substance underlying all reality. He sought a single unifying principle to explain the nature of the world. So this is around what you get in terms of sophistication of other cultures. You get the first guy who asks, what's the nature of the world, right? But In Greek society, it didn't stop first guy to ask what the nature of the world. Somebody else with access to his work, then you get Anaximander, who argued for an indefinite boundless substance called aporeon as the source of all things. This was an early attempt to conceptualize an abstract principle underlying physical reality. Then Heraclitus taught that everything is in constant flux, famously stating, Pansa re, everything flows. He saw reality as a unity of opposites in constant tension and change. Parademus took the opposite view, arguing that change is impossible and that reality is a single, eternal, and unchanging whole. This sparked debates about the nature of being and non-being that influenced later metaphysics. Then all of those people came down to Plato, who's now, going against what all of them are saying. And he proposed a theory of forms, which held that there exists a realm of perfect, unchanging forms or ideas separate from the physical world. The physical world we perceive is merely an imperfect reflection of these forms. True knowledge and reality are found in the realm of forms, not in the ever-changing physical world. Now, this is an idea that, while I don't agree with it, could conceptually make sense to even a modern person today. Like, this is the beginning of what you could call, like, truly modern physics or philosophy, whereas the other people were just giving him enough of a people arguing that he could come in and have, I guess I'd call it, like, a real and sophisticated idea. Whereas these other environments just didn't have this debate happening and wouldn't have a debate like this arise. And this spills over then into things like the arts. I mean, we'll explain why that happens in a second, but then you have something like Aristotle, right? So then Aristotle, he comes in and he rejects Plato's separate form series, instead arguing that form and matter are united in individual substances. Aristotle developed the concepts of substance, essence, and accident to explain the nature of things.
Clearly, this is a world.
He explored causality, identifying 4 types of causes: material, formal, affective, and final. So, like, he basically figured out how reality actually works. Like,
Well,
matter,
this is a world
cause and
where
effect.
clearly they were rewarded in some way, like socially, or even if no one gave them a reward for it, they were raised in a culture or society that enabled them to have emotional intrinsic rewards for doing something like this. And that, I think, is created. It's just when I think about the unifying elements of the cultures that I'm aware of that first generated this, is there are varied sub-tribes that are they have a lot of internal pride and they like to shit on the outsiders. And you even saw this in ancient Egypt. It's like, oh, those people in Alexandria, oh, those people in Cairo. Like, there were significant cultural differences, but there was a lot of trade and interchange as well. So there was comparison. So I feel that, what's the word? Like, a certain amount of xenophobia combined with pluralism, and then another sort of big bad on the outside that enables them to all say, hey, this is us, and we are different from those outsiders.
You mean literally like the Haven network that I want to recreate for a post-fertility collapse world?
Oddly convenient, but I mean, I feel like
Literally
intuitively we
exactly
see
that's
the
what I want the
value.
index to be.
I know, but I think I know, and what I'm saying is it seems conveniently flattering that what we're trying to design is oddly reminiscent of a system that seems to have given birth
It's
to
not
the one
oddly reminiscent,
civilization.
it's specifically designed after it.
Yeah, well, I know, but I think it's interesting that we intuited something that now, when we're looking at this unified civilization,
Yeah, well, I
theory
hadn't
that we
looked at
have.
how big the differences were when you controlled for time. But
Yeah.
now I want to get to make a comparison here. So we're going to go to China. Like, what was their understanding of reality, right?
No,
So you
no.
get to Laozi and Zhangzi. They were believed to have lived between the 6th century BCE, although some scholars state them to the 4th century BCE. So this would be around when all these Greek authors were writing. They're credited as the authors of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao Te Ching, the foundational text of Taoism, which included concepts of Tao, the way, as the source of all being, Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action, the interplay of yin and yang, and simplicity and naturalness as ideals. That's childlike when contrasted with what was going on in Greece at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think it I think shows why Greece was able to sort of explore. Here you have like 2 guys who sat down and they're like, this is the way things are. And then you have like one other guy who pushes back, like Mosey. So this is where you get the will of heaven, the idea that the universe has a moral structure. The heaven's intentions provide a standard for ethics. He believed in consequentialism, so slightly better, right? Like judging the morality of actions based on their outcomes. He believed in universalism, advocating for universal love, Jai I, that does not discriminate between people. Rationalism, and a lot of his, and Monism and some other things, and a lot of his stuff was sort of suppressed as Confucianism grew. So hold on. But the point being is that when you read this stuff, or when you read Confucianism, because I'm sure you guys have read some Confucianism, you just like anyone who's being honest can tell it's not as intellectually sophisticated as something like Aristotle's work or Plato's work, which was, it shows the difference between a culture where you have a bunch of people furiously arguing with each other, and who in other areas of their life, whether it's economics or war, actually have to know how to beat an opponent and actually have to have their ideas work. And I think you can see this in terms of like Greek warfare, for example. Like Alexander the Great figures out like a formation that's really good in Greek warfare, and then he applies it to anyone other than the Greek city states that were very hard for him to unify. And it's like free money cheat, just moving knife through butter all the way to India, where his troops are like, why are we still fighting anymore? This is getting pointless.
I mean, I think what made him really cool was the way that he used geography to his advantage. Yeah.
But the point is that these things all bleed into each other. It's not just the philosophy was hundreds of years ahead. It's the philosophy and the art
Yeah.
and the infrastructure
Yeah.
and the buildings and the everything ahead of my ancestors.
Well, what's more interesting to me again is just how the incentives are aligned to do that. And you need to have a pluralistic culture. You need to have something that forces competition and ingenuity. And I think that you can see throughout history too, and this would require a whole lot more investigation that we don't have time for right now. But I think if we looked at when civilizations collapsed, I would imagine that there's a high level of correlation between that competition falling apart and the fall of a civilization. That when you no longer have this pluralistic competition, but trade and exchange, where you're forcing people to sort of steal from each other, iterate off each other, and compete with each other, but also stay united and strong together against a larger exogenous threat or enemy or big bad, then that's when civilization starts to decline. So maybe we should be concerned that perhaps big bads like Russia and China, sort of like that these tensions internationally will soon subside due to demographic collapse.
Well, I think it's why the urban monoculture has also stolen so much of the vitality of human civilization,
Because it is
it's
homogenized culture. Yes.
Yeah, in a more perfect world, we would have these cultures riffing and doing their own thing, like anime. Like anime required Japan be touched by civilization to create. Their concepts of like video games, like Mario and stuff like that are some of the greatest works of art in our lifetime, and I think in the future will be remembered that way, are coming out, but it's out of this industrial process that marries some of their ancestral traditions. And I think that this is where you get this mistake, right? The mistake that countries make is we can go back to our old ways and just update them for modern civilization, saying, no, what we need to do is we need to take this one culture and put little spins on it, but not try to go back to the way things used to be. So an example of this would be something like even China today. So this is not me as an outsider bemerching China. When China says we need to go back to like Chinese science and Chinese medicine, like the Chinese government will say when we're doing Chinese medicine, it's like random like herbs and stuff that like everybody knows don't work. Like they functionally don't work because that was the nature of that previous system. In the system of the one civilization, things actually have to work. Like if a natural remedy works, it will say, okay, how do I distill the chemical in it? Oh, gnawing on that bark lowers your amount of pain. Okay, what chemical is causing that? Okay, let's mass produce that chemical. Okay, now we have aspirin. And we run into a risk of doing this in the West as well. I mean, the urban monoculture, because of its love of weakness, you can see our video on that particular topic. It tries to venerate their own ancestors, the witches, the druids, the pagans. You get that, I'm queer and I'm a witch. You should not venerate that, right? These people were monstrous. They sacrificed children. They were not civilized man. They needed to be uplifted. Thank God that the Romans colonized my ancestors and saved them from the depravity that they were living in.
What makes me special? Come on! Come on! Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. And I'm a
She looks angry.
Face like that, I'd be angry too. You shut up.
And I think that, and this is the thing, and I think that civilized man, wherever he is, whatever he looks like, whatever ethnicity he is, the cool thing about this theory is it's kind of unifying. Because the truth is that the originators of this civilization, one, they never hold the torch for long. They often pass it on, whether it's Egypt to Mesopotamia to Greece to Rome. But they also mostly don't exist anymore as an ethnic group. Like the ancient Greeks, I can look at ancient Greek statues. They don't look like modern Greek people. Like that ethnic group isn't my ethnic group, but it's also, when you're talking about it, and I think that Italians and the Greek people do undersell themselves when they say they're not. They're probably like 80% related to them, would be my guess. There's probably like a few immigration waves, but like I think that they deserve some credit for that. But they're not the groups that are on top of the world right now. So it doesn't argue for this idea of a dominant cultural group. What it argues for is an idea of a global shared cultural history that none of us really own, that we all are beneficiaries of, whatever our backgrounds are, and we all deserve, when I look back to my history, when I name my kids, like Octavian, one of the names that we're looking for one of our next seasons is going to be Constantine. I am looking to the great figures of Rome. And one show that I would really recommend people watch, if you haven't watched it, you absolutely must watch it. It's called Rome, An Unbiased History. I would watch it chronologically. If you like this show, you are going to love Rome, An Unbiased History. It's by Daba Hadi. He is, I think, like one of the great creators of our age in terms of like meme-ified content. I don't think he has nearly as many subscribers as he could, but it's just because he hasn't done enough videos. But he does a thorough meme-ified history of Rome from the perspective of being ultra, I'd say like jingoistic about Rome. Like when he's describing my ancestors, he'll always have them come on head with like the, the meme of the guy with the head that's caved in and like the face paint on them and just, unable to do anything, or they'll have like sharp teeth whenever they're coming on stage. And I just love it.
All that they would be, no, there was so much we didn't know yet. Burning under the sun, skin is glistening from sweat dripping down. Time will pass.
I love it because it's I think the way that the Chads from around the world are able to look at history and not look at the witches and see their ancestors, but all together look to the shared cultural ancestry and say that's the fire that left human civilization. And I don't need to have an ethnic claim to that to admire it and to learn from it and to build on it.
I think that's really fair. Yeah.
And I note that all our cultures had their witches. It's not just the Celts who had witches, who some people today delusionally rise up despite them being child murderers. But you had them in the African cultures, you had them in ancient China, you had them in ancient Scandinavia, and the ancient Rus had them. All around the world, we had our witches. So the question is, are you able to, with humility, swallow the pride you have in either the culture that is your own genetically or the one that you have drawn some sort of weird weeaboo attachment to, and admit that we all, our greatness all comes from the descendants of one culture, and a culture that's not yours. And that is a culture that brought us this Judeo-Christian tree of religions that helped save us from our witches.
Your move! It's time!
And I think the difficult thing is that normally when people are advocating for a culture, it's their own. And it helps that this isn't ours. I'm so relieved. I'm so relieved that we do not have Greek or Roman ancestry.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this would be such a bad look.
But I think that, and I also argue that this is what created the modern Jew and Christian in another episode, which is to say, when the one true religion crashed with civilization, it, like a particle collider, exploded and created the civilized religions, whether that's post Second Temple Judaism. And as we argue in track 8, I do not think pre-Second Temple Judaism was one of the civilized religions. They were ripping apart animals. They were doing blood sacrifices. They were doing blood magic. They were worshiping multiple gods in the temple. I think that it was through the destruction of that they were freed from this. And if you look at their art from those previous periods, it's nothing special. Their civilization, nothing particularly special. Even the parts of the Bible that were written before that period, while I think they're divinely inspired, they're certainly not particularly sophisticated when contrasted with like ancient Greek work. And actually, some individuals argue that the Bible, is particularly the Moses stories, are actually downstream of Hellenistic works. And there's some compelling evidence there that we can get to, that they were heavily influenced post fact by those.
Specifically, the argument that I found most compelling is just the theme of the story. A group of people being kicked out of a homeland, then looking for a new homeland, then founding a city, then having that city grow into a great city. It feels very much like, the founding story of Rome, or like many ancient Greek myths have this theming, whereas it's basically unheard of in the Mesopotamian region.
But we won't get into that too much in this particular episode.
Something I note about this theory that I want to develop further is the idea that the one civilization, when it blooms within a region, appears to exhaust that region after a golden age, making it hard for civilization to appear there again, and they then fall into what I can only describe as sort of a non-violent slumber, that where they don't produce much in terms of artistic output or civilizational advancement, with the only counter example to this being the Italian Renaissance after the period of the Roman Empire was over. So what I mean by this is it starts in Egypt, then Egypt never really rises again, then it goes to Mesopotamia, then Mesopotamia sort of becomes irrelevant, then it goes to Greece, then Greece sort of becomes irrelevant, then it goes to Rome, then Rome sort of becomes irrelevant, then it breathed again in France through the Charlemagnean Empire, and then that sort of becomes irrelevant, and then it goes into England, which has increasingly become irrelevant. And so the question is, how can you create a sustainable version of this culture, and why does it burn these populations and make them effete and bureaucratic after a while? And that is a theory that we will explore later. But it also means, interestingly, that it's especially hard for any group to claim themselves special because they carried the torch of civilization for a period, because the torch of civilization seems to always burn the group that carries it and make them lesser than the people around them rather than more than the people around them.
We gotta get the kids now.
But hold on, what the point of all this is that we have a shared cultural ancestry that none of us have ownership over. And that cultural ancestry, the height of it, is when you have collaborative pluralism. And that's what we should be fighting for. That's the greatness that was Rome. Oh, and by the way, if you also haven't seen it, and I've recommended it in another show and you still need to watch it, is the Rome miniseries from HBO. Again, haven't seen that, must watch it. And if you haven't seen the first Gladiator, again, a must watch.
Well, and also I want to emphasize not just collaborative pluralism, but collaborative competitive pluralism.
Exactly.
There is a healthy, friendly, trash talking the other side element of this. And I think a lot of our critics or people who want to frame us as enemies misread that when we're like, yeah, like,
Catholics suck. Yeah,
of course you should be dunking on the other side, but you should also be allying and working with the other side. You should both compete. I mean, that is the beauty of sports teams. Anyone who can understand baseball fans, who can trash talk each other about their teams, but then, bond over the sport, is like, they get it. This should not be a complex subject, but I do feel that we get heat for this because people try to make that out about like, oh, you're about hate, you're about you trash talk this other group, therefore you're a supremacist for your own group. Like you're totally missing the point, and you are smart enough to know that is not true. So cool. All right, let's go get the
Love
kids.
you.
I love you
Have a
very
good day,
much.
Simone.
Bye bye bye. Ciao ciao. You're amazing. Maxime Lott, who we are fans of, he on his Substack I think he's running guest posts giving a rational argument for why people should vote for Kamala Harris. And there's another one for why people should vote for Donald Trump. And I'm still reading the Kamala Harris one, but there's this one part of it where the person argues that the economy is doing well and look at GDP and look at unemployment rates and how Kamala Harris has a plan to make things even better. But then they write, many Americans have the mistaken perception that the economy is not doing well, in part because of the cost of groceries, housing, consumer goods and services, and energy are all higher than 4 years ago, and wage growth has not offset these high costs. Like, I'm sorry. So you're arguing that the economy is doing well, and that we're just complaining that we're not happy because our lives are materially worse and economically speaking, but the economy is doing well. So we should vote for Harris. I love that so much. This so the costs that matter to normal people are up. And their wages haven't improved in line with that, but the economy is doing well.
You know how you mentioned to me that like people will always say the economy is doing well when their party's in office.
Yeah.
What he's really just saying is my party's in office.
And
He's
therefore
like,
I
yes,
can find
obviously
some
by
numbers
all
to indicate
real
that things are
measures, the
good.
economy's in shambles.
Yeah.
But my party is in office.
And therefore things are good. Okay. Shut up. I just thought that was very entertaining.
There was a dream that was wrong. It shall be realized. These are the wishes of Marcus Aurelius.
Go to them.
Careful. Torsten, out of the way! Out of the way! What are you doing, you nut job?